All right, welcome to our webinar, the NextGen Transformation Playbook. My name is Kelly Frost. I'm the Marketing Director here at Sense Corp, and I'm going to be reviewing some of the housekeeping items before we get started today. First of all attendees will be on mute throughout the presentation. If you have any questions about the content, please type them into the Q&A box, and we will be going through those at the end of the webinar. As you're listening, if you experience any technical issues, please type them into the chat box, and I will be monitoring those throughout the webinar. Lastly, we are recording the webinar, and we'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording to all registrants. And before we get started, I wanted to launch a poll so that we can better understand our audience. So you should be seeing that come up on your screen shortly. Okay, where are you in your transformation journey? All right, and I'm going to give you all a few seconds to answer that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go through what Sense Corp and who we are. Sense Corp offers a variety of consulting services across data, digital, and business transformation. Our team of skilled consultants offers insights and solutions to the most important problems facing business and government today. All right. Looks like we have almost all of you voted. All right, so the majority of the attendees are leading or engaging in a transformation program right now. The other about third are learning more about transformation. Okay, and now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Michael Daehne. Michael has extensive experience leading operational and digital transformation programs across a number of industries, including energy, manufacturing, telecom, and financial services. He is passionate about partnering with operational and IT executives to transform for the digital era. Michael, I'm going to kick it over to you now.
Great, thanks Kelly. Good afternoon everyone. Good to be with you today. Excited to talk a little bit more about NextGen transformation. As Kelly said, my name is Michael Daehne. I lead the transformation practice here at Sense Corp. And just to reiterate a little bit of what Kelly said, we really help our clients work through data, digital, and operational transformation programs and challenge their or attack their most challenging problems. And so we're going to talk in depth today about transformation and how best to go about successfully executing your transformation journey. I want to start with a basic question, which is, why do we care, right? Why are we all, those on the call, whether you're leading a transformation program or just wanting to learn more, why are we hearing so much about it and why should we care? And I think there's a few really interesting ways to look at this. One of which is looking at the Fortune 500. Since 1955, 1,800 companies have been on that list, and only 12% remain today. If you look at the S&P 500, and there's a chart up on your screen right now, it's very telling to see how the average lifespan of companies has continued to decline over the last several decades. And as we think about technology continuing to advance, the question now isn't if your industry and your organization will be disrupted, it's just a matter of when. You know, we see it every day across many different industries. And even within organizations, every business function more and more is being affected by and challenged by the promise of digital transformation. Whether it's in the finance and accounting realm with tasks like period end close and business planning and forecasting, supply chain with getting the right part to the right place at the right time, even all the way to the way you manage your people and your talent, analytics and digital capabilities are disrupting the norms of how we've done things. And what's so interesting is that many of the casualties of the Fortune 500, those who fell out of the list, it wasn't that they didn't see disruption coming, it was that they didn't respond to it in the right way, right? They were too protective of their core and the way they had done things, and they didn't embrace the opportunity to transform their business model for this new age. And so now more than ever before, mastering that broad organization-wide digital transformation is really an imperative for organizations across every industry. Now, a little bit of bad news here is transformation is really hard. I saw on the poll, many of you are currently engaged in or living through big transformation projects, and so you know this well. Depending on who you ask, there are billions or trillions of dollars being invested right now in digital transformation programs. But the sobering statistic is that 3 out of 4 fail. It means more of these large projects fail than succeed. And so with that huge investment and those somewhat staggering statistics about failure, figuring out how to do this right is more important than ever before. The good news is, many of you, I think, have lived through these kind of big technology projects in the past, and you know some of the things that are really important for successfully delivering technology transformation. It's some of those things like investing in change management, things like taking an iterative deployment approach and not doing a big bang go live, and really actively managing your risk as you go through a program. So we've all got these kind of in our tool belt, these ways of going about big technology projects. And so the common sense approach is, hey, let me just keep using what I've been using for the last several decades on big technology transformation projects. But if you dig a bit deeper, I would suggest to you that today's technology transformation project is not the same as those we have been doing over the last several decades. Now, the experience of all that project work is no doubt still relevant, but it's a different world in which we're operating right now. In the past, often we were focused on designing and deploying large ERP platforms or building out our CRM. Now we're leaning into things like artificial intelligence and modern digital platforms. In the past, our workforce was often somewhat stable. Now many of us have disruption just among the kind of human capital side of our organization. You know, many of the industries we're working with have this mass exodus of baby boomers, and we're replacing them with folks 2 or 3 years out of school. That creates its own set of constraints and obstacles as you go through a transformation program. For those who are in more of a B2C space, the whole dynamic with the customer has changed dramatically, right? It used to be that customers were kind of passive targets of our go-to-market sales marketing activities. Now it's a back and forth. Our customers are dynamic networks who not only have a feedback loop with us, but also talk among each other. From a technology perspective, we're no longer really implementing just siloed systems. We're focused more on the complex cross-system integrations. And then the pace of technology change has always been rapid, but it's pretty difficult to keep up now with the evolution of different technologies and the disruptors, in many cases coming out of nowhere to offer a more competitive and compelling technology solution. So if you pull all that together, there's structural differences in the workforce, the technologies are evolving rapidly, our customer needs are changing. All of that means that the game has changed. The game of transformation has fundamentally changed. And so naturally then, we probably need a new playbook to win that game. And so what we're going to talk about today is some strategies, some tips and tricks from our experience here at SenseCorp of how best to win the next-gen transformation game. And I'll talk about things like iterative planning and rapid experimentation. We'll discuss some really cool work we're doing in terms of leveraging data to more effectively manage change within a big transformation program. We'll talk about Agile. It's a buzzword I'm sure many of you hear about and may be experimenting with yourselves. I'll speak a little bit to training. What does a modern or a next-gen training approach need to look like? And last but not least, we'll discuss what it means to build an integrated experience as you think about your transformation program, as opposed to just an isolated technology or isolated system. So, the key thing here is it doesn't mean that the lessons of the past get thrown out the window. It just means that we need to, use take a new view to it and make sure that we are effectively thinking through how to successfully manage the risk, manage the cost, and certainly ensure value as we go through our transformation programs. So I'm going to jump into these. Some of them we'll dig into in a little bit more detail. Others will scratch the surface. As Kelly mentioned, if you have questions, please put them into the chat box. Would love to answer them as we go through this conversation. So let's start with rapid experimentation and iterative planning. There's an old corporate catchphrase that is, we have to go slow before we can go fast. I'm sure we've all heard that. I've probably said it a few times in my career. And there's a lot of truth in that, right? You want to build out a good, solid plan before you start embarking on a big project. Historically, transformation programs have taken this approach, which is let's spend a ton of time mapping out every little piece of our transformation vision, our journey. Let's do detailed resource and capacity planning and identify and mitigate all the risks. Depending on the scale of your program, that could take anywhere from 6 to 12 months just to build the plan. That means you could spend a year on transformation before you change a single process or write a single line of code. Now, I'll tell you that building a good plan is as important today as ever before. But what we often find ourselves coaching clients through is when you think about a digital transformation and analytics-driven journey, don't over-engineer the planning phase. Spend 6 or 8 weeks on it, define your vision, lay out where you want to go, build out that plan, but you can't effectively lay out every line item in a work breakdown structure for 3 years of transformation. So why is that? Well, I think one good way to look at it is how fast is the technology changing? This chart on the right side of the screen really shows that classic technology disruption or evolution curve. And the next line down are individuals. Think about those as our employees or customers. They're not able to keep up with the pace of technology change, but they're much closer at keeping up than the business is or the corporate entity is, and certainly as it relates to public policy. And so that means that the technology continues to evolve month to month, week to week. So if you lay out a 3-year journey, there's a decent chance that something's going to pop up 6, 9, 12 months in that probably changes your calculus about what technology platforms you should be investing in and how you should be going about that. So the way to go about this is broad brushstrokes, build out your vision and your plan, and then start iterating, start experimenting. A couple good examples where we've seen this work are really in the customer experience optimization phase. So I think every organization in the world right now is talking about how do we optimize or improve our customer experience in a way that ultimately helps us improve our bottom line. Well, you can't really sit in a vacuum for 6 or 8 months putting together a perfect customer experience and deploying it all at once, because most of the time we don't exactly know what the customer wants. So what we've been doing a lot with our clients is how do you iteratively deploy and experiment with various treatments or activities to say, if we try this one piece of white glove service, or if we change an interface on our website, if we change what offer we're presenting to the customer, doing all that with a small set of customers and seeing what works and what doesn't, you're then able to more effectively target your investment as you build that out and scale it up for a broader customer base. A similar approach of experimentation is, really how you're going to go about starting your journey in AI or machine learning. I would be hard pressed to find you a data scientist who would say, hey, let me build you an 18-month detailed work plan for all the cool insights I'm going to find. Most of them will say, hey, let me start looking at your data, and I'll call you in 2 weeks and tell you where I think there's some potential for what we should explore more. And so that whole idea of experimenting and planning along as you go through your transformation journey is really a new way of looking at these things that we're seeing a lot of success with a number of our clients. Shifting ahead, this is one I'm really passionate about, something that here at SenseCorp we're making a lot of progress in is change management. The change management is something that has always been near and dear to our hearts here at SenseCorp, and it's been critical to transformation programs. And every consulting firm in the world has a change management methodology. We certainly have one we're quite proud of. And I put kind of the executive summary of that up here for you to see. Those things typically involved, conducting stakeholder analysis workshops and doing change readiness surveys, starting to build out a change plan. All of those foundational steps as you define your transformation journey and begin, deploying change into your organization. All of those things are as important today as ever before. And in fact, there's some research that really reinforces how important change management and participation from those in your organization is to a big transformation project. There's a guy by the name of Paul Nutt who's done some really interesting research looking at how organizations engage their employees as they drive out a transformation program. And he compared two things. He looked at one strategy he called the delegation strategy or a participation strategy, and the other was the edict. So edict is classic command and control. CEO shows up and says, everybody, we're changing. We're going to invest in technology. Get on board. Delegation is, how do we create a coalition for change? How do we get influencers within our organization across different departments and units to buy into this vision and help us collaboratively drive out the vision and the project? So what that means is being thoughtful about change management and the way we get buy-in across the organization is as critical as ever before, and that hasn't changed. But what's cool is we have a lot more tools at our disposal now to do that effectively, particularly in the data and analytics space. And one thing that we've been pioneering here at SenseCorp with a lot of success is really weaving data into that change management planning and execution. Our tagline is powering insight-driven organizations, and this is all about insight-driven change management. So in the upfront stages of a project, we do two things. One is stakeholder analysis, right? Where do we think within the organization we may have pockets of resistance? And where are there places where there's a lot of appetite for change that we need to get more investment and buy-in from? And then the other piece is, how do we build a coalition for change? Some of you who may be familiar with Cotter's change management framework certainly will remember that the second piece of his framework is around building a powerful coalition for change. Historically, we did both of those things through workshops. We'd sit in a conference room with some of the key folks in the client, and we'd start talking about various departments and stakeholders and mapping out kind of red, yellow, green. What is the lay of the land as we think about our stakeholders, the sentiment as it relates to the project, and who do we need to get into our coalition for change to help influence the organization to adopt some of the transformation. Now we're able to do that in more of a data-driven way. So I'll call out specifically on the influencer piece. We call that organizational network analysis, which is how do we map out within the organization who the influencers are. And we have a proprietary tool we call sense-making. It's our sense-making capability. And as you might imagine, based on the name, it helps us use data to make sense of who's who in the organization and who do we need to get on board as part of that coalition for change. So what we do here is up front, when we do a change readiness survey, we ask all the employees in the organization a couple questions beyond the usuals. Usual questions are you aware of the project? Do you know how it will affect your day-to-day work? How do you feel about it? We've added on a few questions here that zoom out from the project and just say, hey, who do you go to for professional advice and guidance? And who do you go to for energy and engagement? We basically give folks a drop-down list of all the employees in the organization, and they can pick 3 to 5 of those names. We pull all that data back together, and across every organization we've done this at, you start to see some really interesting themes that to reach the whole organization, you oftentimes only need 5–10% of the organization to be your quote-unquote influencers. So that then means that you can pull them in as project champions, you can engage them, you can equip them with information about the program, and use them as your conduits to gather feedback from the broader organization. It really helps infuse more data and more certainty into the way you go about your change management approach. Again, it's something we've been seeing a lot of really great success with in a number of our large transformation programs, and this is one I'd love to talk more about. If anyone wants to learn more about how we're doing this and the results, certainly may be worth a follow-up after the webinar. So I'm going to move forward to the third one, which we titled Say Farewell to Waterfall and Hello to Agile. So I'm sure many of you have heard a lot of content on this topic in the last 3 to 5 years. Just want to break it down a little bit more and talk through what that transition looks like and how to effectively embrace an agile approach. So, I'm a big analogy guy, and I'm also a sports fan. So if we think about how to explain waterfall and agile, I'm going to use 2 sporting analogies here. The first is the relay race for waterfall, right? You have different phases in the project, and typically you have different resources, different humans executing. You have a BA gathering requirements, you have technical folks doing the design and development, comes back around for testing, you may bring a change management person in to help you with training. Waterfall makes a lot of sense, and it really came out of a manufacturing space. It's a very logical approach to project work. But it has its challenges, right? Waterfall projects are typically slow and long. They're sometimes siloed and a bit dysfunctional because of the division of labor. And most importantly, waterfall projects are somewhat rigid and unresponsive. I think this cost of change chart really brings that home, which is the further into the project you are, the more expensive it is to change your mind about what you want. And I think we all know that that's just human nature, right? If you let 3 or 6 or 9 months go by, the market dynamics, the organizational priorities, those things change. And inherently, our technology needs to be able to adapt to those changes. But in a waterfall approach, you sometimes are at the 11th hour of the project, and the project manager looks up and says, the change you want makes a lot of sense, but based on some decisions we made 9 months ago, we just can't do that at this point. It would double the cost. And so all of that has led a lot of organizations to look for a better way, particularly as it relates to digital projects. And so sticking with the sporting analogy, we'll talk about Agile a little bit more as kind of the rugby of software development approaches here. It's totally different, right? All the team members are packed together and everyone is focused on moving the ball forward at the same time. Now, I will tell you that the only thing worse than using a waterfall methodology or an outdated approach to NextGen transformation is incorrectly using Agile. And this is one of those things that we see all the time everybody wants to use Agile, but folks often aren't sure exactly how to do it. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking through what Agile is and how you use it effectively. So first thing, foundationally, it's not really even a methodology or a framework. It's more a set of values and principles. If you've heard of things like Scrum and Kanban, those are frameworks that adhere to those Agile values and principles. And then the big thing is there's a difference between Agile as kind of an adjective of, hey, we want you to be Agile as you go through this project, versus we want you to leverage the Agile values and principles. From time to time, we'll have clients say, hey, it's a Waterfall methodology, but we need you to be Agile. Or they'll say, we want you to take an iterative Agile approach. And for us, and for you in your various technology projects, the question you should ask is, which is it? Is it Agile or is it iterative? Is it Agile or is it Waterfall? Because those things are not exactly the same. As you look through what makes a successful Agile project run to completion and deliver value, there's really two things that I think should be top of mind. The first is to focus on value created, value provided, not just on cost controlled. And the second one is to actively embrace change. So I'm just going to pause for a second. I've been talking here for the last 10 or 20 minutes. Just think about those two things in relation to how we all historically have managed projects. I'm saying focus less on budget and cost control and accept changes. For some folks, that makes the hair on their neck stand up, right? Like, Michael, what are you saying? That's just not how we manage projects. But in the NextGen transformation space, it requires a fundamental shift of even what questions we're asking as we scope a project and as we manage it. The other thing that often rattles people is I'll say, well, we're not going to have a project manager for this project if you want to use Agile. And they'll say, how can we not have a manager? And as you dig deeper into how to do this well, it really relies on having a product owner who maintains your backlog and kind of oversees the overall product, and then an Agile team that is in many ways self-managing, may have a Scrum Master or some other approach to do that. But all of this, if you zoom out from the tactics of it and the day-to-day, this is a philosophical change. This is a cultural change in an IT department or for a software development team. And what's so critical here is it's usually the IT folks who understand this. It's often hard for those of us with more of a business background. You know, if you may be the CFO or COO of your organization, it can be very challenging to have your project team tell you, hey, don't worry about cost control. Did you get the value you wanted? And so this is one that, again, we have a lot of content and best practices on how to leverage Agile effectively. And I encourage you to reach out following this webinar if you want to learn more about how best to do that on your transformation projects. So I'm going to shift ahead here to our last two, and then we'll certainly leave some time at the end for questions. The next one's about training. And I would challenge you to think a little bit more about it as learning as opposed to just training. So historically, on a lot of large technology investments or transformation programs, the way we thought about training was, let's look within our organization at the various roles, and let's build targeted training to the different roles. Our ops managers may need a certain type of training, our field staff or our FP&A team, we may need to deliver targeted training to them. But that relied on a pretty critical assumption, which was that all employees are somewhat created equal within each of those roles. Now, the thought of targeted training or targeted learning was spot on. But this is where the changes in the workforce that we mentioned earlier really come into play. So now in many organizations and many industries, each department, each function doesn't look exactly the same with the team members who are fulfilling those roles. Oftentimes, you may have two folks with the same title, one who's been a veteran of your company for 30 years, and the other who's fresh out of college, 2 or 3 years of experience, and you're asking them to do the same work. You usually can get by in a business as usual setting with those two folks. Maybe they have different experience levels, different understanding of the market and the technologies you're using, but you can usually stitch it together and get by. But when you start radically changing the business processes, the technology interfaces they're using, those differences in your workforce really start to show. And a common misconception is the folks I've had here forever, they'll be fine. They know what they're doing. They can deal with change. Sometimes we see the reverse effect where the people with less experience and less of a kind of an incumbent perspective on how things should be done, they're able to adapt more quickly than those who have been around a long time. So regardless of which situation you're in, the takeaway here is you need to be thinking about learning in more of a stratified way. Within each department or each role, think about the different groupings of people you have. Some of it is based on years of experience, but there's other attributes you should be thinking about. One big one that a lot of our clients, see significant variation in among folks who have the same role is what we call digital dexterity. You might think of that as technical acumen too. I was on a flight a few weeks ago, and he's probably 15 or 16-year-old kid in front of me, and he was watching the TV screen on the back of the airline seat in front of him. He had an iPad up with a different show on, and he had his iPhone up, and he was scrolling around playing a video game. Right? That's the definition of digital dexterity. Now, I was getting motion sick sitting behind him watching all the different things going on. But if you think about folks like him who are either already in the workforce or who are transitioning in, they are coming at technology from a totally different perspective than those who maybe spent the first 15, 20, 25 years of their career doing their work without advanced technologies in play. And so as you build your learning and your training approaches, think about who your audience is, what their levels of technology acumen are, and what their different abilities are to absorb change and to adapt to the various things you're building out. The other thing that's so crucial here from a learning perspective is what's the method or the mechanism through which you deliver learning. I think many of us who've lived through big transformation projects, I'm sure have either led or taken part in these all-day or all-week classroom trainings, right? You build out a new ERP or you change your customer portal, you build something new, and you say, we need to fly everyone across the country to one place. We're going to sit them in our training center, and we're going to put PowerPoint slides in front of them for 3 days, and then we'll give some hands-on training. That still is necessary and can work in some settings. But more and more, we're seeing a lot of our client organizations have success with more of what we call a micro-learning approach. So if you think about short 3 to 5 minute videos explaining how to do a certain task, what the steps are, what the things to be thinking about are, that often is as effective or more effective than the classroom training. And if you're driving out a project that has a bunch of different work streams and you're affecting a lot of different folks, simply from a time and budget perspective, it can be very difficult to hold detailed classroom trainings for every change you deploy. And so exploring different micro-learning and targeted knowledge delivery mechanisms can be a really great way to accelerate user adoption and ensure that you're providing the right kind of learning to the right people at the right time. So I'm going to shift ahead to one more here, and then we'll we'll pull it all together and spend a little time on any questions from those on the call. This is my favorite of the 5, and it's the one that I hope you will take away from this webinar if you forget everything else. And that is build an integrated experience, not just an isolated system. So if we think about how we all have typically approached big technology projects in the past, the way it usually worked was within a department or within a function, someone saw a problem, right? Someone working in finance or accounting said, we really need to upgrade or migrate our ERP. Someone in customer service said, our call center platform is outdated. It doesn't give us a lot of good options for how we route calls in a more specialized way. You have these conversations happening in every function of the business where different leaders were seeing problems and they were trying to solve the problem within their silo. And a lot of that was with the best of intentions, right? If you're the VP of supply chain, you probably should solve your supply chain challenges. Same idea with sales or marketing or customer service. But this led to a few challenges. The first is you often didn't have organization-wide cohesion. You didn't have all of those things pulled together to optimize the entire organization. And the other one is that if every function has their own project, that often leads to resource constraints. Because no matter how siloed we think our individual project is, the processes within the business often straddle different departments. If you think about a service order to cash flow or a procure to pay flow, that data essentially is going to live in your ERP owned by finance and accounting. Some of the data inputs will be owned by supply chain. There are customer impacts. It's very hard to solve a problem without touching other pieces of the business. And so that led to a lot of what I would say incomplete value delivery on projects like this, where you'd get 60, 70% of the value you pitched in your business case, but you weren't able to take it all the way to that last step, kind of that last mile, to truly deliver transformative value for the business. It often worked out okay, given the problems we were trying to solve, but the deficiencies in that approach are now more apparent than ever before. Well, why is that? Part of it's what we talked about earlier. How do we interact with our customers? It used to be that customers were kind of passive targets. And if they didn't like the way that we were interacting with them, they didn't really have much recourse. They kind of had to deal with it if they liked the product enough. But now with that business to consumer or business to customer relationship being more dynamic, they have a say and they have more choice. The classic example here is the cable industry, right? 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, no one really liked their cable company, but you kind of had to deal with it, right? They had largely a geographic monopoly. And if you wanted cable, you had an option. And you probably thought they were overcharging you. I certainly did. You probably thought that they weren't very helpful when you called in. You probably were frustrated when, if you had to get a technician out at your house, they gave you a window that was like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you were somehow expected to just stay home from work that day and be home for the cable technician. None of the customers liked that dynamic, but we kind of just learned to deal with it. Well, what changed was disruption, right? The Netflixes and Hulus of the world came in with streaming capabilities. Sling is another example. And they started challenging the existing paradigm and saying, you know what, Michael, if you hate your cable company, we've got a better option. So that caused the cable industry to take a step back and look at what is the experience we're delivering for our customer. And what that really led to was a focus on building a unified customer experience. Many of you may have heard of the concept of customer journey mapping, right? How do we look at something in the eyes of the customer, not from the eyes of the corporation or the organization? And so to do that, to build a unified customer journey or unified customer experience, you simply cannot take the approach of the past of solving the problem department by department. You have to zoom out and look at how do we, in a cross-functional way, deliver an optimal customer experience and, in fact, an optimal employee experience where they feel that we have done the heavy lifting of connecting the dots and integrating the systems behind the scenes so that they're not having to do everything in a piecemeal fashion. What this really boils down to is how do we optimize the whole instead of just trying to optimize the parts? And I think there's a really important takeaway here, which is as you embark on a next-gen transformation journey, there will be those in your organization that want to solve the problem at a departmental level or a functional level. And this is one of the most challenging political dynamics on a modern transformation program is you have to challenge that assumption, because taking a siloed approach to next-gen transformation is probably the quickest way to erode the ROI of your transformation project. And it's something that won't show itself on month 1 or month 6. Everything will feel okay if you're taking a siloed approach. It'll be when you get a year in or 2 years in and you start looking for the results, you start comparing the actuals with your value projections in your business case, and you will fall short of the efficiencies you laid out, of the optimized customer experience, because you were taking this more siloed, more piecemeal approach. So I talked a bit about the cable industry, and I want to dig into a case study where we worked with one of the nation's largest cable companies to solve exactly this problem of customer experience transformation. This organization was seeing a significant decrease in their subscriber count. Again, some of that was being driven by disruption from the streaming services and just increased competition. But what was particularly alarming was as we started looking into the data for their retention tracking, it wasn't just that they were losing customers, they were often losing their highest value customers at an alarming pace. I always give the example of my father who's retired. He loves watching TV all day long, and he's very, very conflict averse. So he doesn't want to call and argue with the cable company. So he's the guy who they have steadily added $5 to his bill every month for 40 years, right? And so he's paying an astronomical amount of money for his cable package, which point of contention in the family, but that's another story. He's one of those customers who these cable companies really want to hold on to. That's how they maximize their profit, is to hang on to retain their highest value customers. And so if you're losing them, the natural question was, how do we focus in on that subset of our customers and more effectively serve them and more effectively retain them as customers? So what we did is we helped them design and deploy a differentiated customer service model. Think about that as kind of a white glove service model. So that started with some functional work with their sales and marketing team of, how do you define high value customers? What are the various things we should be looking at for value and for risk? What puts those customers at risk to disconnect and switch to a competitor? It then led to a heavy amount of technical work. If you think about pulling all that data together to segment or classify your customers, not just based on their billing data, not just on how much they're paying, but also on all the risk factors. What puts them at risk to disconnect? And it's common sense things like, if this person has called in 10 times in the last 2 days, they're probably not too happy with their experience. If this person has had a technician out at their house 3 times in a week, they're probably not singing our praises as the best customer service company they've ever dealt with. And so we started pulling all that data together in near real time and segmenting or classifying their customers such that we then could say, for these really high value, high risk customers, let's route them to our best call center agent. Let's potentially present them with some custom offers, right? We may want to give them a more compelling offer for the next 12 months versus our basic offers in order to retain them. So all sorts of design work, all sorts of technical work, but that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the people transformation side of this. If you're going to deliver a different experience to different customers, that means you have to equip your employees to deliver that segmented experience. And so we spent a lot of energy and time saying, what does the org design need to look like? How do we change the staffing in our call centers? How do we identify our best call center agents and our best technicians in order to match them with those customers that we so critically need to retain and provide a good experience to? That meant workforce transformation. It meant we took a targeted, stratified learning approach. You know, I talked about this in the previous section. We had to look among their call center agents and among their technicians about how are different folks going to react to the different technologies we're putting in front of them and the different treatments we're asking them to provide to our customers. So a lot of really challenging but really cool work as it related to the workforce transformation and equipping those folks to deliver a white glove customer experience. And the question everyone asks is, well, did it work? And if you look at those, I put some mock-up charts that kind of reflect some of the data that we saw, which is that blue line kind of represents treated, those folks who got white glove service. And you can see their call volume dropped dramatically. We resolved their issue on the first call much more often than we did for the rest of the population. And the voice of the customer, that satisfaction, again, was outperforming the average significantly. So all that came together to increase the retention rates of those critical customers and ultimately have a really positive material impact on the company's financials. So what I think is so cool about that story is that was cross-functional in every way. We could not drive it out with just customer service. We couldn't solve it with just finance. We had a team, a cross-functional team at the executive level helping define the vision and involved in the implementation and tracking of this program. And it ultimately resulted in a really cool unified experience for the employees. They weren't toggling between a bunch of different systems. They had one view coaching them through what experience to provide. And it provided a seamless experience across call center, field technicians, and even the digital, the internet portal, provided a seamless experience across all of those capabilities for the customer. So if you think about your own organization and your own transformation objectives and journey, I hope you will take away from this call some ideas, some questions to ask. You know, one of the best things an IT or operational leader can do at the start of a transformation journey is to ask some tough questions of your peers, of your vendor partners, and say, are we thinking about this the right way? Are we using data and insights to build a good change plan? Are we leveraging the right methodologies and approaches as we build out our software? Are we putting the right focus on learning? And are we thinking about the uniqueness of each employee as we build out our learning capabilities? And certainly that last one, are we zooming out and solving the problem of an integrated experience for our employees, for our customers, and not just trying to build several different technologies or several platforms and hope that it works out? So I hope this is, triggered some thought and interest as you go through your own transformation journey. I would encourage you, certainly we'll leave some time for questions here, but if any of this piqued your interest, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or through our marketing@sensecorp.com account. And we can not only meet and talk through some of these in more specifics, but also point you to a ton of thought leadership and content we have on these topics and others as it relates to driving out a successful transformation program. So with that, we'll pause and Kelly, see if there's any questions from those on the phone.
All right. Looks like we do have a few in here, and feel free to just keep typing them in as we continue talking. Okay, first question is, Michael, you talked about building cross-functional, holistic digital experiences for employees and customers. If that's the goal, who in the organization should own digital transformation? Does it have to be the CEO?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that a lot of organizations kind of grapple with a bit. So there's a few ways to look at this. Some organizations have appointed a chief transformation officer or a chief digital officer who's tasked with driving this out. The COO, the chief operating officer, oftentimes makes sense to pull together the various threads across the organization as you go through a transformation journey. But I will tell you that on the most successful transformations we have seen and led in the last 3 to 5 years, the CEO has been personally engaged in helping define that vision and helping his or her direct reports and those throughout the organization, drive out that vision and stay accountable to delivering that transformation. Because of the size of these transformation programs, oftentimes this is something that is visible to the board and externally to the street. And so having a very engaged leader at the top is really critical to successfully delivering one of these projects.
Okay, thank you. One more question here, and it's regarding cost control during Agile work. Are there best practice metrics to quantify value, especially in the immediate term, resulting from iterative experimentation transformation?
Yeah, that's a great example. Or a great question. So as we go through kind of doing something in an agile fashion, and even that, what I mentioned earlier, the rapid experimenting and iterating, even in those smaller sprints, we work with clients to define success criteria, things we can quantify of, we're not going to solve the whole puzzle in the next 4 weeks or 8 weeks, but what is one tangible inefficiency or pain point or challenge you're trying to solve for? And let's try to tackle that in this first sprint. It's a good way to ensure the right accountability up front. So when you get to the end of a sprint, you know that you have in fact delivered value against that initial kind of set of success criteria.
Did that answer your question, Gloria? Great, okay. So I think I have one more question here, and we do just have about 5 more minutes. How has the rapid evolution and growth of cloud technologies affected the digital transformation journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few, break this into at least 2 categories. If you think about cloud, you can think about cloud, I'll call it cloud storage to some extent, as the underlying platform. And then separately, there's this concept of software as a service, SaaS. In the particularly analytics space, as you want to explore, big data and advanced modeling and predictive analytics, that first group, cloud storage, is a huge enabler and accelerator because you can bite off just a little bit. You can start small and start that iterating and experimenting on a small platform and scale it up as your capability and your needs in the analytics space grow. So that's a huge asset in terms of what cloud can do for a next-gen transformation. The second group, software as a service, presents its own opportunity, but also some challenges. So, I mentioned ERP platforms a few times in here. Many of the big ERP players, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, they're trying to push their own clients to the cloud, to their SaaS capabilities. And the pitch to the client is it's subscription-based we, the provider, are going to build out new features every year, every quarter. And there's a lot of good in that because it takes the burden off of your own IT organization to deal with that work effort. The challenge is, in a SaaS environment, you oftentimes have less control over what is being built out in that platform. And so as you lay out a transformation journey, if you are leveraging SaaS capabilities, be really clear up front with your SaaS provider, whether it's for your ERP or your CRM or any of your other core technologies, about exactly what features you need to be successful, and kind of do that fit gap analysis up front to ensure that you're not going to be 6 or 12 months down the road in your transformation journey without the right features from your SaaS providers.
All right, thank you for the questions. We still have a couple more we're going to try to get to before the end of the call. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So Rick's asking about how if transformation, how it's affected if we're anticipating a heavy reliance on COTS systems. So for those on the call, COTS, commercial off the shelf, which really ties in with what I was saying on the software as a service side. One of the cool things, even in the last 5 or 10 years, is a lot of the needs in various organizations that previously had to be fulfilled through custom development, there are now a ton of commercial off-the-shelf solutions for. A good example of that is field service. So if your organization, cable is a good example, but even if you think about the oil field services or others, if you have a heavy field service presence, if you wanted to build out a custom technology, a custom application 5, 10 years ago for that, you probably had to start from scratch and build that out yourself. Now there are dozens of different providers with those kind of capabilities. And so, like I said on the SaaS question, it can be a great accelerator for you. It can lower your overall cost profile as you build out your transformation. But there's also some things to watch out for because you will have less control if you are taking a COTS solution and trying to configure it as opposed to building something out for your specific needs.
Okay, and I think just this last question here, I think we have time to squeeze it in. From Pedro, what new disruptors do we see hitting the market? Cryptocurrency and 5G seem to be the low-hanging fruit right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, and two good examples that you called out there. One of the interesting things, I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, is that the corporate entity organizations are pretty far behind the pace of technology change often. And so sometimes we have clients that are asking for things that you look at it and you go, man, that's like 1995 kind of stuff or 2005. So Pedro, your question's the reverse, which is what's out there in front of us that some of our clients and the organizations you all work with aren't even exploring yet, but that will be coming. 5G is a hot topic right now, and I agree that's probably a low-hanging fruit. The other one that I'd call out is really augmented reality, where we see with a lot of our clients that have kind of staff scattered about the country or the world doing certain activities, the augmented reality capabilities can really accelerate the way you equip them with knowledge and standardize the experience, and in some ways mitigate that, call it human error or variability across a scattered workforce. So that's another one that we're helping a few of our clients work through as it relates to an emerging technology.
All right, thank you for your time today, everyone. I know we are right up at 2 o'clock, so I just want to thank you for attending. If you're at the start of your transformation journey and looking for guidance, or somewhere along the way and looking for a correction, we welcome you to reach out. You will be receiving a follow-up email probably Monday with the webinar recording and some links to other resources that we think you'll find helpful. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Michael directly, or you can email me at marketing@sensecorp.com. Again, thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.